we'll move on overseas now.
It seems Malala Yousufzai is...
Today we focus on Malala Yousufzai. She's the 14-year-old blogger from Pakistan's Swat Valley.
Malala Yousufzai was a 7th grade schoolgirl living in the Swat region of northern Pakistan when she started to write a blog for the BBC. In it, she documented her daily life and her desire to have an education. At the time Malala began to write her blog, Taliban militants were taking over the Swat Valley, banning girls from attending class and destroying schools. The blog was published on the BBC Urdu website under a pseudonym because of fears for Malala's safety if her identity became known. However, as the blog became known, Malala and her father became outspoken critics of the Taliban and public advocates for girls' education.
I thought that my people need me and I shall raise my voice.
As a consequence of her public profile, she began to receive death threats.
Hunted her down at her school.
These threats were acted upon with appalling consequences on the 9th of October 2012, when Malala was the victim of an attempted assassination. She was shot in the head by a gunman while on the bus on the way home from school. She had been specifically targeted. After days in a critical condition, Malala was transferred to the UK, where she was treated in hospital in Birmingham. After intensive treatment, including an operation to reconstruct her skull, she continues to recuperate with her family. She remains in the UK. The Taliban have said that they will target Malala again, as well as others who follow her example. The global reaction to the attack on Malala was considerable. The I Am Malala petition to the UN was created, demanding that by 2015, no child should be left out of school. Malala has just become the youngest ever person to be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Good afternoon and welcome to the last session of today, to this forum session discussing equity in education, a focus on female advancement. Although Malala's story will be familiar to many of us, it still articulates very powerfully an inspiring message that exemplifies the moral case for advancement in education for girls. Many of you will have heard former President Bill Clinton last night and President Obasanjo this morning, again echoing these sentiments and speaking passionately about increasing access to education for girls, both focusing on the moral and human rights dimensions of this important topic. Of course, there is also a very strong policy case for closing the gap for girls' education. Failing to educate girls reduces socioeconomic outcomes, both for girls and young women themselves, but also for the communities in which they live and for the next generation. Arguments for investing in schooling for girls go beyond the fundamental case for equity. At a first-order level, economic outcomes are constrained when only 50% of the population can be economically productive and are therefore an untapped reservoir. Educating girls can lead to increased labour force participation. It can help with positive health outcomes for women and their families, lead to reduced fertility rates. And finally, as the primary caregivers, educated women have a key role in the intergenerational transmission of knowledge. This forum session aims to explore the solutions to improving equity in education, both from the perspective of policymakers and for practitioners. We're honoured to have a highly diverse and expert panel with us today to examine these topics. If I may just introduce them. Lawrence Chickering, first of all, is the president and founder of Educate Girls Globally. He has 30 years' experience designing and implementing reforms of government institutions, and in 1999 founded EGG to promote girls' education and general education reform in government schools. Dr. Tidu Maini is the special envoy to Her Highness Sheikha Moza bint Nasser, Chairperson of the Qatar Foundation. Following extensive business experience across a range of sectors and in international contexts, his current role means he has been supporting the Educate a Child initiative. Next to Dr. Maini, we have Maysa Jalbout, who is a non-resident fellow of the Centre for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution. Prior to that, Maysa was the CEO of the Queen Rania Foundation based in Jordan, and before that led work for the Canadian International Development Agency looking at policy around girls' education. And finally, at the end of our panel, we have Dr. Riek Machar Teny, who is Vice President of the Republic of South Sudan, a country where girls' education is a key policy focus. So welcome to all of our panelists. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and Your Excellency. I'd like to start by just asking each of the panelists to briefly, in a moment or so, just summarize their perspective on the current state of girls' education and the issues that need to be addressed. Lawrence, could I start with you?
Yes, of course. Most of the discussion at this conference has concerned education as a problem of supply, as a problem of delivering education to people and improving delivery. My concern and what interests my organization is focused much more on the problem of the demand side for education, which is special for the poorest communities, for girls, tribal girls, who are beaten down by culture and who don't feel a self-confidence and self-esteem to be able to use, excuse me, to use education to their full advantage. So my focus and the focus of my organization is to develop various empowerment schemes to empower the poor and girls to feel they deserve education and to relish it and to commit themselves to it.
Thank you. Dr. Maini, would you comment for a moment on the issues facing girls' education today?
I think the movie clip you saw on Malala provokes two opposite reactions, which normally don't happen very often in life. One is of extreme anger at what this poor girl went through, and the other one is of extreme hope that she is a perfect role model if we're going to change anything. She brings hope, she brings a leadership model to the world in a way which is unprecedented. And I think, as I will explain to you in a few moments, the initiative we have taken in Doha, in Qatar, in Educate a Child, will show you some of the elements that have been really explained by Malala through her spirit and her determination.
Thank you. Maysa, can I ask you to follow on, please?
Well, I think the thing that strikes me about watching the video is that for those of us who work in the education sector or have worked for a long time, we have seen or have met many Malalas. And almost every country has a group of these girls. And what's amazing about her story is that it captured the attention of so many people and of the world. So I think the time is ripe for people who work in this sector, for governments, for advocates, for even the private sector to get into this field and to try to make a difference. I wanted to share some statistics, if you don't mind. I tried to put together, we're all very familiar with the statistics, but there are a few that are exceptionally compelling. When I was looking through them last night, I found one that you will, of course, be familiar with, which is a youth from Sudan, a girl from Sudan, is more likely to die in childbirth than to finish primary school. Just over 1/3 of girls enroll in lower secondary school in sub-Saharan Africa. In Afghanistan, there are only 66 girls that enroll in school to every 100 boys. In Somalia, there are only 55 girls to every 100 boys. Rates of secondary enrollment are as low as 17% for girls in sub-Saharan Africa. And the list just goes on. So the moral story is there, it's compelling, and the time is definitely right.
Thank you. And Your Excellency.
Well, first of all, I would like to state that education generally, whether it's for boys or girls, in our country is our top priority. But then when you come to the education of girl child, we started very early that girls go to school in our region. That at a certain time when Sudan was won in the 1960s, Juba, which is now the current capital of South Sudan, used to lead the whole Sudan, even used to lead Khartoum. But because we went into war for 50 years, girl education lagged behind in South Sudan. But despite that, we have governors elected who are women, who came up through the educational system. I have statistics which, if that could be flashed, a table which shows the enrollment in schools, state by state. We have 10 states. You'll find that the enrollment, when they start the enrollment, there's no much difference between girl child enrollment and the boy. But then the problems become the retention in the schools, as you just said. Early marriages is a big problem.
Okay.
That they lose continuing their education because of early marriage.
Okay. I know you have some more evidence on this topic, which I would be very keen to hear about in a moment, if that's okay. Thank you very much for your initial comments to open this session. First of all, I'd like to ask Maysa if I could just ask you to frame some of our discussions in terms of the policy perspective. From the research that you've done through your policy work, could you tell us about some successful policies that you've seen implemented to support increased access and quality for girls?
Well, rather than talk about only specific policies in certain countries, because I'm sure the audience is quite familiar with that, I wanted to sort of talk about the formula of what a successful policy looked like, whether it came from a funding agency or from the countries themselves. There are sort of three factors that need to be in place for things to really come together and to sort of see that magic that leads to proper implementation. One is for the issue to be based on rights, and we know that education is a human right, and we've spent a lot of time today talking about the supply and the demand, but in the conferences that I usually go to, UN conferences and international conferences, we spend a lot of time talking about what is a human right and what is not. And that does actually make a big difference because when something is a human right, it means that a government has already made a commitment to it. It's already signed a convention or a Bill of Rights or something that says this is a top priority for our people, or at least a basic need. The second one is for it to actually be a need. And in the countries that we're discussing, it is definitely a need. But what more than a need, it has to be an investment that is actually going to make a difference. And in order for us to be able to convince politicians or private sector organizations or foundations or whoever to invest in the specific goal at hand, which in this case happens to be girls' education, we need to be able to, as an education community, deliver the compelling story behind it. And there are plenty of compelling statistics in the field. If we look at sub-Saharan Africa, which is a big concern for everyone that works in the girls' education sector, the fact is that investing in girls' education has the potential to boost agricultural output by 25%. I mean, think of how compelling that is as a statistic. Another one that has been used by the World Bank and many different organizations is that studies have shown, and not just one study, more than one study has shown that for each additional year of schooling for an individual, it has the potential to add 10% to their income. On the flip side of it, for countries that are not investing in girls' education, we are seeing huge losses in real economic terms. 65 low and middle income countries are losing something like $92 billion a year by not investing in girls' education. These are exceptionally compelling statistics. And for us in the education community, we're not really great at getting those figures out there. And we could probably learn something from the health sector and how compelling they make their argument globally and are able to drive resources into that sector because they're able to tell the story a little bit better than we are. The third factor, in addition to it being a right and being a basic need and a compelling investment, is that the demand is there and that there's a critical mass of people, organization, and messaging that comes together in a very clear way, in sync, to present the case. The advocacy side has to be there in order for a policy to work, in order for a policy to be effective. And the message that I'd like to get across is that today we talked a lot about skills and about education being very important for economic output, and all of us agree to that, but I think we need to get better at talking about education being a matter of life and death. Not only are we seeing young girls and women dying for the right to have an education, but it is a matter of life and death. A child born to a mother who can read stands a 50% chance, a greater chance of surviving past the age of 5. If girls in sub-Saharan Africa made it to secondary school, 1.8 million child deaths would be prevented, and the list goes on. And so to me, that is how a policy can be effective, if those three factors come together.
Thank you, Maysa. You've outlined a very compelling case there. I'd like to just move now to some of our panelists' practical experience and exploring some approaches that are working on the ground. Could I turn first to Dr. Tidu Maini? Dr. Maini would like to share with us something about the Qatar Foundation's Educated Child Programme and has a short video to introduce this work, if that's ready.
Seeing things on the ground really is totally different than reading about them or hearing about them.
You know, what I saw in Bangladesh is so different than what I just saw in Gaza. They are all different in terms of the environment, different in terms of the crisis. But at the end of the day, you see the results are the same. Kids are out of schools. Kids are striving to accomplish their human rights, which is education, live decently as others. Good? You're good?
The teachers that we have is 1 to 64. That means one teacher handling 64 learners.
I knew that there is lack of materials, schools and classrooms, but the classrooms, we barely can call them classrooms. I have seen in Bangladesh some pencils which I never saw before in my life. plastic tubes that they just cut, and they inserted this heads that they could write with. This is very creative, very creative. You did that? Whatever we say, whatever we do is not enough to rectify the situation. I just need to go and digest whatever I saw and to rethink everything. And I want to create one school that can be set as a model. It can be done, it can be achieved, but we need really concerted efforts where we could really reach the standard and the level that those kids deserve.
Ladies and gentlemen, this project was launched 5 months ago by Sheikha Moza in Qatar. In 5 months, we have managed to bring 500,000 children out of school into school. This is the speed at which we are working. And I'm not an educationalist, so you'll forgive me for not continuing with the analysis or the deep perspective my expert colleagues on the panel will give you. All I want to show you is a few examples of what we've done and what the mission is behind this project. The mission is to make a major contribution to trigger significant breakthroughs in providing out-of-school children in poverty, crisis, and conflict-affected environments with a full course of quality primary education. That is our mission, and it's very simple, ladies and gentlemen. We're trying to focus on 10% of the 60 million children out of school. Our focus is on children between the age of about 3 to 10 or 12. That's what we're after, and we need to keep that in mind as we move on. I'm not sure if I know how to operate this. I'll try my best.
I think you have some help from the back.
Okay. So the vision is a world where every individual has the opportunity and right to learn through a quality education. Let's concentrate for a moment on this. The strategic objectives are that we wish to contribute to the enrollment of at least 10%. This is the commitment Sheikha Moza has given to the world, that she will try her best to mobilize resources to get 10% of the 61 million children out of school by 2015. This is a very ambitious target, and as I said earlier, we have managed in the last 6 months to get 500,000 children into school. The support, and our mission is to support the development of educational quality so that the children who attend school today stay in school and have the opportunity to learn. The whole issue of quality of education, the sustainability, the retention, we feel will come as a second stage or simultaneously with our main objective, which is to get children into school as quickly as we can, because we think that's where the crisis is. We wish to contribute and to mobilize at least $1 billion in the next 3 years from business and governments to get children into school. And as you can see, getting 500,000 children into school was no mean feat. And we have put all our resources we can lay our hands on to trigger this. We want to keep the issue of out-of-school children at the top of the global agenda, and this is important because the right to education is as important as the right to freedom and human rights. And finally, we need to consider the contribution to the development and recognition of education above all as an important goal. So if we move on, I'll give you a few examples of what we've done in the last 5 months and be happy to expand and talk to you more about what else we can do. The activities are based on values which we all share, and I don't need to go into those. So the first example I wanted to show you is the example of a project we are currently involved in Kenya, in Samburu-land. This is a project where the ambition is to get a large number of partners together. We have the Norwegians working with us and various NGOs, including UNESCO. And the objective is to get 31,000 children into school, the age group I talked about, between 3 and 10 or 3 and 12 in the next 3 years. And this is a project which has been agreed and is under full implementation over the next 4 years. And the first year, we already have achieved the target of 9,000 girls, which we had set ourselves. Well, in fact, in 6 months, we've managed to get 9,000 girls into school. The Bangladesh project is the next one. This is a project where we're working with BRAC, who are implementing the project on the ground. And here the issue is the classrooms. A lot of the areas in Bangladesh are areas in flooded zones where it's difficult to get to school, or if there is a school, it gets wiped away because of the rains and the flooding. And we are very involved in this. We're committed to building new schools, but the schools this time are going to be on boats rather than on land. And we have, under planned 600 boats, we've committed to building 600 boats for the schools and getting 10,000 children into school. And the commitment is over a 4-year cycle. And the whole idea about our involvement is we choose the most deserving cases, we commit to a full cycle of 4 years, and provided the project goes well, we continue thereafter as well, and find ways to make the quality better and the sustainability of these projects as well. There's an interesting project in India where the ambition is to get 64,000 girls and 15,000 boys into school by 2018. This is another commitment we've made. This project is fully funded and is being rolled out. And finally, this is one of the first examples of working with industry. We've had an agreement with Airtel, which is the largest mobile operator in India and parts of Africa as well, where we're going to work together to take children into school. And this is a very ambitious program, and the plan in the next 3 years is to ramp up to 41,000 children into school. So I just want to give you a quick glimpse of action on the ground where we are moving very quickly and implementing programs. And this is just the beginning. This is the first industrial collaboration, if you like, the collaboration between business and our foundation. And the idea is in the next 3 years, we'll have at least 9 or 10 other businesses who will work with us and contribute significantly with technology, with money and resources. And of course, their business practices as well. One of the very most important ways to look at these projects is to make sure that they're well done and that you measure the outcomes and you look at the milestones and the timelines very carefully as well. So this is just a very quick example of what we're trying to do.
Thank you for that excellent overview. Dr. Maini, could I ask you about the philosophy of the program, specifically in terms of female advancement? Is it something that you focus on specifically within the projects as an overall goal for the program?
Not specifically. I think what we feel is the focus has to be on getting as many children as possible into school. And that's why we've committed ourselves to 10%. And by definition, 50% of those will be women. And we feel that once we get these women into school and girls into school, they'll become role models. And role models are very important in life. If you look at any sector of life, female leadership is a very important role model. In my own country, in Qatar, this is a very important and significant example of how the leadership is viewed. For example, if you look at our university system, in engineering, we have more than 50% girls. And the reason these girls are very keen to get educated is because they have a role model in Sheikha Moza. And I think role models are terribly important, and we feel that by pushing this program of massive intervention and getting a large number of children to school, 50% will be girls. They'll become good role models, they'll be mothers in the future, and they'll be educated, and hopefully they'll also be help with microfinance to start their own business to have sustainable systems in place.
Thank you, and certainly Sheikha Moza is a great role model both within Qatar, within these programs, and internationally.
Yeah.
Thank you. Laurie, could I perhaps turn to you now and ask you to tell us a bit more about another very practical program, the Educating Girls Globally program. I'd be very keen to hear what are the key components of the program that make it successful?
Our program comes out of my background in public policy. I'm not an educator. I have started several public policy organizations which aim to try and change government policy. I got involved in this about 10 or 12 years ago because I noted that most people who do this are educators, who know how to run schools, who know how to teach a class, but they tend not to know how to transfer the lessons of their work into governments where all scale and sustainability are. I set about to try and create a model which could work through government schools in active partnership with governments at potentially very large scales and very low costs. We have, just to tell you the results of it, and then I'll get to the details of it, we have worked in 2 states of India to do this, including the most tribal, male-dominated state of Rajasthan, where we were given by the ministry the most tribal, most difficult districts far from the capital. And we are now in, we're now in every school in 2 whole school districts, which is 4,500 schools serving 590,000 children, and with plans to go to 10,000 schools soon. We have not proven sustainability, but when we prove sustainability, which we will, that our 2-year program will benefit not only kids currently in school, but also future generations. The leverage on the model will be really, will sound hallucinatory. The heart of the program is really about public-private partnerships, but the private part of it is not corporations and educators and the institutions that have been the subject of most of the discussion here. They are local civil society organizations. It's engaging local communities, every community around the schools, and empowering them to take ownership in spirit of the school, bringing together all the major stakeholders in the school. That would be parents and teachers, girls, and even government bureaucrats. In working in 4,500 schools and basically empowering them to decide to commit to whatever they care about, not what we think they ought to do. We basically have created a powerful engine of progress without conflict in a single community, not one out of 4,500. The main instruments of empowerment here are the school management committees, which we empower to develop plans for the school and to improve the school. Girls' parliaments, in which the girls are elected by both the boys and the girls to be leaders of the school, and they imitate the structure of the parliaments, imitate the state government. There's a chief minister and a minister of finance, minister of education, health, and so on. And these girls become role models and leaders for the community. They are elected by both boys and girls, and they play a crucial role in working with parents to get girls who've dropped out of school back into school and to do a variety of other things. The community projects is another element of empowerment. We give no money to anyone. Our only currency is empowerment. To give you the sense of the strength of this part of our empowerment program, in 500 schools, 178 schools after 2 years had clean water that had no clean water before. We played no role in it other than to encourage them to establish priorities and then work to commit to do them. The girls' latrines, of which there were 45% of the schools had them, 70% of them had them at the end of 2 years. The idea of all of this is that one of the greatest impediments to education for both boys and girls in the poorest areas happens in traditional and tribal communities where people live by tradition through roles. They're basically passive and fatalistic. They don't believe in a certain sense that they can control their own lives. And we basically create structures and instruments where through the school management committee, through the girls' parliaments, community projects, through life skill training, activate communities to play an active role in promoting change so that the poor themselves become a powerful instrument in promoting change. The other element is that the government plays a very important role in this. The government and the people in the communities come together not as government and non-government, but as citizens, working together to make the schools better. And the result is that the government, we're starting to train government officials to scale a project. That means that there's no potential limit to the amount of scale that we could achieve in a state in Rajasthan, which has 55 million people and 78,000 schools, 11 million children. It becomes possible to really imagine doing this. We have started we believe our model is proven, and we are now actively seeking partnerships with other NGOs that can see the possibility that introducing our empowerment model could greatly increase the impact of what they're doing. Our first partnership of this kind is with Africare, which is working in 27 African countries, mainly in health and agriculture. They want to be in education. And we are now actively working with them to start doing joint projects with them. We're also actively talking to GEMS about doing some projects with GEMS, also probably in Africa. So
Thank
that's
you very
where we
much.
are.
Thank you. That's a great overview, and a project that by its very nature seems highly transferable to a number of different contexts. Perhaps if I could just ask, you've been running the program since I think 1999, and I would be very keen to hear actually how the program has changed life for the girls and women and for the communities. What are the tangible outcomes that you've seen from the work of the programs?
Well, one of the tangible outcomes is that we have a very active creative learning program, and the effect on learning, there's a lot of emphasis on how many kids are in school, but when you really look at how much kids are learning in school, it's very distressing in many places. In Rajasthan, for instance, only 15% of kids in the 6th to 8th grade could read paragraphs in English. Only 40%, roughly, could read paragraphs in Hindi, and only 25% could do simple math problems up to 2 digits of addition and subtraction. After 3 months of teaching in creative learning, the English one went up 300%, the Hindi one went from 40% to 60%, and the other went from 25 to 57%, roughly. Now, a major reason for that, I believe, is because the entire program energizes and activates kids and makes them feel confident that they can accomplish things and do things, and makes them want to do things that before they were not able to do. Girls, because you asked about girls, one of the things we noticed, I'm sorry, one of the things that we noticed is that girls, tribal girls, have an easy time if you ask them a question about an objective issue. They have an easy and confident time answering it. For instance, did you have a bath this morning? Have you had breakfast? They can answer those things easily. But if you ask a question requiring a subjective component and a judgment, such as, do you regard Nabil, who steals from you, as your friend, they will have great difficulty answering that question. The reason is because culture has beaten them down and has made them feel extremely subservient, and in relation to education, has made them feel they have no right to education and they have no capacity really to succeed in it. A major effect of this empowerment training in multiple ways, and there are about 9 different ways in which this affects people, is that the greatest learning gains, the tribal girls started out furthest behind, and by far the greatest learning gains came among the tribal girls.
Great, thank you. That's very, very interesting. Could I now move to South Sudan and ask Your Excellency to give us your perspective on girls' education in South Sudan?
Can I have my slide on?
I think so. Is that possible?
And with your permission, can I get up?
Please.
Thank you. Well, this shows you the enrollment in primary schools. Central Equatoria, CE, males 57,180, females 51,010, just about equal. Eastern Equatoria 42,518, and then females 31,160, Jonglei, and then you go on down. Now, I said our problem is how is retaining these figures in the schools. We have problem of early marriages. Second, poverty, because once they go to higher grades in primary school and they want to go to secondary school, there are no boarding schools. And therefore it becomes difficult for them to move from their home to far away in secondary schools. Can you get me the other slide, please? Move on. Now, 70% of population of South Sudan are pastoralists. Means they migrate more or less six months in the year. They migrate from their home estates to cattle camps. This is a school teacher, the one sitting, moving with the population to the cattle camps to go and teach them. You know, he's only one there, so it's a difficulty. The other slide. Similarly, a school under the tree, but more emphasized in the third slide. Please, the third slide. Oh, yes. The blue one, open air schools. That is under trees, no building. Sometimes even in the permanent home estates, you will find that there are no schools. So villages, a village would say, we have a school under a tree. The red one, permanent schools, then the tents, sometimes we make schools in tents, semi-permanent, the purple, the blue, a school with a roof, and then others. Get me the other slide. Yeah, that's the situation. Sitting under the tree, the teacher with his, I don't know what, a blackboard anyway, which is broken up. I want to say, importance of education. This is how I started. I believe I have come with three ministers. Minister of Higher Education is here. Can you get up, please? Dr. Peter Adok, Minister of General Education, Joseph Bokel, Minister of Culture, Youth, and Sports. I think three of us started this way. And three of us are PhD holders, you know? So our problem is availability of schools, whether it is for girls or boys. And reason is we have been at war for over 50 years. And when we were invited, we say, oh, we must go and tell our story. So we came to tell you our story. Our girls would go to schools if there are schools, structures with support. We were only 1 year and 8 months independent. So we are less than 2 years as an independent country. Our textbooks are printed abroad. And therefore, I want to conclude, I want to attract you to come to South Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. If I may add, I was born in Uganda in 1943, and I went to a school in 1950, 51, in a school with a grass roof. So I know what it's all about, and I went on to England to Imperial College, and then I was a professor in Berkeley and MIT. And here I am, and I'm passionately devoted to getting these kids into school. And I think the most important thing we discussed in this conference is action. The time for analysis is over. The world spends far too much time talking about it, and there are far too many consultants and specialists around this world. I think we need to act, we need to commit ourselves, and we need to give our time, our money, and commitment to these efforts, not wait for somebody else to pay for it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just before I come to the audience to ask if you've got any questions for our panelists, I'd like to return to Maysa, who we've heard some great examples of girls' education in specific contexts, and some examples of interventions and programs that are really working. I wonder if you could just reflect for us on your experiences and knowledge from your policy and practice perspective of any key lessons or key frameworks that you would like to share with the group.
Sure, I'll try to do that
for
quickly.
policymakers and practitioners.
Well, there's nothing more powerful than the story that comes from, the ground, and to see the action that's taking place. Just a few key things. I think the research has shown is that you can't just assume that by having an emphasis on education that girls will go to school also. It's true that a good basic education policy and program will be good for both girls and boys. But too often we see in countries that girls are held back for many different reasons. So the first thing is that it has to be made a priority. It has to be spelled out. It has to be stated as a priority. And there's no cookie-cutter approach. I mean, we know a lot of successful stories, and we have, many books that look at cases in individual countries that have been successful but have not necessarily been implemented in other countries successfully, because each country is unique and has unique problems. But there have been some lessons learned, and there have been some interesting things to look at in countries such as Rwanda, where we've seen a very grassroots movement to building up the education sector by engaging people from the ground up. I mean, the amount of money that they have been able to save in Rwanda by building their own schools as opposed to putting out tenders to the private sector to build schools is incredible and should be a role model to so many countries that don't have enough resources to do that. Bangladesh and its story with incentives and stipends is also very interesting and should be looked at for countries that are having specific challenges in getting girls to go to school, and especially girls that would otherwise be working. There are sort of 10 rules that we always look at when we're trying to put in place effective models of girls' education. I'm going to run through them very quickly. And it's been alluded to by my fellow panelists, the idea of getting all stakeholders involved right from the outset in creating a strategy, having all the different players there. Too often governments close the door and decide on the policy or the program from behind closed doors. That doesn't work anymore. Ownership has to be at the community level. People from all backgrounds need to be involved. The educators, the children themselves, the parents, everyone has to be there. You have to engage women. If you want girls to go to school, women need to be at the policy table. They need to be at the governance table, at the school level, and they have to be teachers. Too often we see that teachers are not available, particularly at the secondary school level, and therefore parents were not allowed their girls to go to school because there isn't a female teacher available. We have to train our teachers to change classroom practices that discriminate against girls. We have to make sure that girls are encouraged, as we heard, to be able to express their minds, to be able to engage, to be able to really reap the benefits from the education that they're getting. We have to also make it safe for them to go to school. Too often we're seeing that the reason that girls don't go to school is because they're being assaulted on the way to school, at school. By involving the community, by engaging the community, and by allowing parents to play a part in making sure that the passage to and from school is safe helps a great deal. We have to plan for girl-friendly schools. Not every type of school works for girls. And we've been involved in building so many schools that we found that we've made very simple mistakes that actually prohibit girls from going to school, such as not providing the proper facilities, or locating them in a dangerous part of town, or etc. Don't stop at the primary level. Secondary level is crucial for girls and for reaping that benefit from the investment that we talked about. Look at alternative models to education, non-formal education, using technology to bring it right to where the girls are at, and using incentives as we discussed. And lastly, keep the feedback loop open all the time. Just because something is supposed to work on paper doesn't mean that it necessarily will work in practice. You need to, again, engage the community in giving you feedback and being nimble and changing practices on the ground regularly.
Thank you, Maysa. Can I now open the questioning to the floor? Do we have some microphones? Perhaps this lady on the front table here. If you could just introduce yourself and direct your question to a particular panelist. Thank you.
My name is Anjimire Ntira Oponyo. I am the Permanent Secretary for Education in Malawi, the Ministry of Education in Malawi. But I've been an education advisor for the World Bank and the UN. So I wanted to offer them advice. I wanted to offer Sudan advice because I've been on both sides of the table. I've been on the donor side and I've been on the recipient side. And I wanted to tell them that we have been independent for 50 years and we still have schools like that because of the attitude that we expected somebody to do it for us. And I like what she said about Rwanda and what the Rwandans have done. And maybe you could get best practice from Rwanda and work with the communities from the beginning to make education a priority and girls' education a priority, and to encourage parents to demand good quality education. There has to be demand. There has to be that demand from the parents that they want the education for their children. So you said, oh, you want to invite donors to come. That's how we did it. So we sat around expecting donors to come, and sure, donors came, but there are a lot of communities we can't reach, and they are still learning under trees. So I don't do it our way. Thank you.
Thank you. Your Excellency, would you like to respond?
Yes, I would like to respond. We have a positive policy towards girl education. 7 years ago, we launched a program called Support Girl-Child Education in general. In government, we also have a positive policy that at least 35% of public positions must be held by women. Now, that forces us to educate the girl, because this is at least. Our population, 56% of it is female. Now, when I call for, I really don't mean the donor, I mean the investor. Those who want to invest in education. We have experienced also short period experience before we became independent with the donor community. There is success, there is failure. So we know how they behave. But I am appealing for those who want to do investment in partnership in education, because we believe that if we educated our population, we will be very competitive. We'll be very competitive with the rest of Africa. Well, it's an irony that the first mayor of Dubai was a Sudanese, you know?
Okay.
First mayor of this place was a Sudanese. So the problem is that we had been fighting ourselves for very long till the country split into two, and the underdog had been South Sudan, which was fighting for its independence. And you recall I said, in girl education, in 1960, the South was leading, because we do not have inhibitions, religious ones, or we may have cultural ones. They like marrying off girls, like the Minister of Minister of Finance said, they like selling girls in exchange for dowry, which is cows. But this is a practice which we can combat very easily once we have schools and trained teachers. So our appeal is for people to come and invest in education in our country, in partnership with us as government.
I think the key word is investment, as my friend says, but it's not investment in money alone. It's investment in emotions. It's investment in bringing know-how and partnerships and ideas. It's not just money that counts. It's your attitude. And this is why I think business has a major role to play, if only we can mobilize business. For example, if countries that have a business that comes from overseas, they should be forced to take part in the educational system somehow, right, through a trade-off. And you get a license for your mobile telecoms, or you get a license for oil and gas, provided you do something in return for us more than just extracting the oil and gas. And that's the secret.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like just
briefly,
to comment on what was just said about investment of a non-financial sort. I think the key to change in all these places is civic engagement, is engagement of people with each other. And the emotional part of it is crucial. In our program, a key moment happens in the first village meeting when the girls who've dropped out of school stand up and address the meeting and ask their fathers and the village for a chance in life. And you can see the change in the faces on the men. They come into their bodies in a way. They step outside the role, and because the girls have stepped outside their subservient role, and they have made a genuine appeal to the men, and the men respond and become advocates almost immediately for girls in school. And that is the great antidote to the trance of cultural and traditional paralysis that freezes a lot of these communities and makes it so hard for them to progress. That can be changed powerfully.
Thank you, Laurie. That's very powerful. Can I just take another question from this table? Thank you.
Arif Zaman from the Commonwealth Business Council, one of the co-organisers of this forum. I just want to ask a question about, in terms of what business can do. We have an initiative at the Commonwealth Business Council with the International Federation of Business and Professional Women called Commonwealth Business Women. And one of the messages we've had from business women in Pakistan and Jamaica and Uganda and other countries is that they want to do something, particularly in terms of working with women in education in universities. Because we're seeing so many universities now, 80% of women coming through, 80% of the people are women. So my question to the panelists, to Tidu and maybe others, what do they see as a potential and opportunity as we're seeing more women in the workplace, particularly in middle management, in senior management, in a number of Commonwealth and other countries, and indeed in the UAE as well? What can they do in terms of girls in school? I know that in Pakistan, we have BPW, our partner organization, has actually established a school, a quality school in one of the poorest parts of Karachi, in Azam Basti, which across the 98 countries that the International Federation of Business and Professional Women are in is held out as an example. But there's a whole range of things that businesswomen can do, from starting schools to mentoring. I just want to ask the panel, what actually would they like businesswomen to do? And I'd like to invite anybody from a Commonwealth country to work with us in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Maini,
I
would
would
you like
like
to try
business women who are in positions of power to do 3 simple things. Devote 5% of their salary and bonuses to education, deliver 5% of their time, and 5% of their emotional commitment. And if you can get those 3 things from women leaders, the rest will follow. I don't think we should discriminate and make a specific focus on women. I think we should make a specific focus on children. And the women and boys and girls will automatically fall into line. But the commitment has to come really from the parents. And I think if you have business leaders in your Commonwealth Business Council who are members, they should really set an example by persuading their companies to donate 5% of their top line revenue, 5% of their salaries, and 5% of their time. This is being done by one of the companies in Dubai, actually. There's a private equity group here that has that as a commitment from the organization. They spend those amounts of money. Unfortunately, it does boil down to real commitment in the end of time and money that gets things done.
Thank you. That's a very clear direction. Maysa, would you like to comment?
Well, I can't really disagree with that, but I will add to it that I think there is a great value and a unique value that comes from women being engaged in policymaking and implementation. First of all, it diversifies the perspective, which we desperately need. We have been on one path, on one track. It hasn't worked that great. And involving more women will hopefully come up with new solutions. The second is being role models. I think we cannot underestimate the importance of seeing successful women to young women around the world, no matter what background they have. If a young girl in her community cannot see a successful woman, she cannot see hope. She cannot see what she could possibly look like. So I think they have an incredibly powerful role to play. And if you want more ideas, I will give them gladly.
Thank you. I think we maybe have time for one more question. David.
I'm David Wilson. I'm Director of Asian Schools with GEMS Education. I've got a question that's in 2 parts, but really probably more to Lawrence and the other panelists. Lawrence, you mentioned a couple of times beaten down by culture. Education, of course, is a partnership between schools, students, families, and communities. And when you're in a situation where the cultural values, the religious values, the traditional values of the family or the culture you're supporting, the community you're supporting, is against female education, how do we establish this partnership? I think you alluded to it in terms of the appeal to fathers by daughters. The second part of the question relates to the first, and that is action. So you mentioned the importance of action. We'd all agree it's overdue and necessary now. But action, to be intelligent, needs to be supported by evidence. I think this is the point you made about research and feedback and keeping it going. The example that you gave, Excellency, of your personal story from a classroom under a tree to a PhD and perhaps your ministerial position is extremely eloquent. But we've been doing this for decades. Where are the examples of women who've had interventions who can come forth and be role models for the next generation? It's a much more eloquent thing than dry statistics or the desire to help. Where do we find these role models and how do we best exploit them so they can inspire the next generation of females? Thank you.
Well, I think that in our experience, when it's commonly thought that traditional cultures are antagonistic to girls being in school, my own belief is, if that were really true, it wouldn't be true that in 4,500 schools, in every single school, we're able to penetrate through that and able to get past it so that men embrace girls being in school. And the question is, what else might be happening? I think what I believe is happening is that the nature of traditional life lived by roles, traditional roles, is really more a process thing than a substantive thing. It's that the men don't have an active animus against girls being in school. It's just that part of the girl's role is not to be in school. It's to be in the home or to whatever it is. And that it's a preconscious kind of state. When the girls stand up in the village and appeal to the men, a neuroscientist told me that what's happening in the brain, it activates the brain, and she becomes an active person. She steps outside her role, and the men then imitate her example, and they connect in a way, in a much more modern way, the man with the girl as an individual, her aspirations and dreams and so on, rather than simply in the static condition of not being in school. And I think that is, in a way, conscious engagement is the beginning of all cooperation. It's the beginning of the village coming together to do community projects. It's a crucial building block in nation building, but it's almost entirely ignored by people who talk about nation building and think you can do it by passing rights and doing things in the central government. Policy is important, but my own bias, strong bias, is that the impacts of policy will be relatively weak unless you work in every village and engage people, because when they really commit to do these things through civic engagement, you get a powerful response that you can't even imagine when you do it from the center alone.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I think we're probably out of time, so I probably need to wrap up. I think this afternoon's discussion has highlighted to me the very important role that a number of different stakeholders can play in advancing female education, from policymakers to businesses, to other organizations, NGOs, and of course to the communities themselves and every actor within the community. I'd like to thank the audience for your participation and patience at the end of what's been a very exciting but very long day, and to the panel for a very positive and action-focused discussion that has certainly inspired me and filled me with hope, actually. So thank you very much.
Thank you.